the past couple of days, we've heard from several, well, not startups, but there's always startups out there. What are the pros and cons of buying from a startup? What happens if they don't have an exit strategy, or what is their exit strategy? And I don't know, can we kind of go into what you guys think about buying from a startup?
I'm petrified. I run a business where we deal with SMBs, and since we're a managed service provider, and since we're their IT department, I really would hate to be the one holding the bag. So most of the time I try to see, A, they're very well funded, if they have larger vendors that are buying in either licensing or through sales agreements for their products that will provide the cover that I believe I need, and how well evolved their support is. If there's anything outside of that, then rather than me, my clients have offloaded support to us. Now I can't, I'll be left, thinking what's going on, and maybe I have to rip and replace with my own funds, and I really don't want to do that. So to me, I always wait for somebody else to take the plunge. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's because I'm such a coward, but.
Do you think you're missing out not being a first adopter? Because even if you put it in the contract or whatever, you can't get blood from a rock, so it doesn't really matter, right, if they go out of business, but are you missing out?
Sometimes I feel I am. I think that's probably something there's so much flux in the industry right now. That's something I think we'd have to address either with contractual obligations or with contractual obligations, and insure ourselves against failure to perform from those companies. But it's getting to that stage where we can only bring evolutionary increases in performance to what we do. We're gonna, if we want to go further and bring a revolutionary change, we're gonna have to start being a little bit bolder and grow some.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a monetary advantage as well, often, where it may not be as expensive as a current solution.
I think that's the most important reason for me. I got a Nimble because in order to increase my NetApp to perform like I need my storage to, it would be extremely cost prohibitive. So, for me, it was really like my only option to get the kind of performance I needed, to go with somebody who is newer and doing something a little more crazy than the old guard.
And that's sort of inevitable that the startups are going to have, newer technology, newer thoughts as part of their products because they're new. And you see that even among startups. Somebody from 3 years ago, their product probably isn't going to be as well adapted philosophically to the market as a startup that's launching today, because the guy today has benefited from 3 years of lessons and failures from that guy, and that guy also paved the way. But on the flip side, of course, you got to think about the maturity of the product and things like that too. So it's probably not as, at this point, it's not a radical thing to buy from Nimble, but it may be more radical to buy from a company that hasn't been on the market for years and years.
Yeah, there's a substantial difference between the startup who came out of stealth yesterday, where you have to have some intestinal fortitude to say, that product is exactly what I need and I'm going to use it, and if it turns out that it doesn't work or the company goes out of business or both, that I'll just throw that money away because it was a gamble worth taking.
And not only that, but we're talking about storage here.
Right.
And we're talking about what are you going to trust your data to? What are you going to trust? Data is the company in many cases.
And what about support? Because it's not only the product that counts, but the support as well. In those startups, I don't know.
And it's a gamble, just like I was saying.
Yeah. And
on the flip side, though, you may get more responsive support from a startup.
Yeah.
Right.
I've seen the founders and the CTO fly to Minneapolis and sit with the company for days.
If you're their third customer, you're going to get treated really well because you're their third customer.
Yeah. And the same thing happens on the financial side too. I've seen a lot of people get screaming deals on really good products by basically agreeing to be the stunt company, agreeing to
Case study.
a lot of companies. I mean, we've actually got, and it's happened here at Tech Field Day sometimes, where we've had customers be brought in to talk to the delegates as part of the Tech Field Day presentation. Those guys didn't do that because they're true believers in the company. Of course, they may be, but I think the real reason they did it is because their company got a great deal on the product by being willing to do things like that.
Right, but so dealing with the true startup, the being in their first 100 customers, is a gamble, and sometimes gambles are just worth it. It's a long shot. I'm going to get 100 to 1 on my money, and that might be worthwhile. But then there's dealing with the established startup, Nimble right now.
Or Compellent a few years ago.
Or Compellent a few years ago. But the growth rates for startups have accelerated substantially. Compellent took 2 or 3 times as long as Nimble to get to the we have 300 customers stage.
Well, that's like the old joke, right? I mean, where everyone says, well, they just started overnight, but really they've been in business for like 10 years, and now everyone's just hearing about them.
And so if you're dealing with the established startup, the gamble's a lot smaller, and now it becomes, what am I going to get for that, and how long are they going to run? And if you're dealing with an established startup, you can pretty much go, yes, they might go out of business, their service might go in the toilet. But that's going to be a year or 18 months or 2 years from now. Those people don't die instantaneously.
But you have a big advantage in the US instead of in Europe, because you're talking about Nimble as an established company, while in Europe
where they're just getting started.
How much does the pedigree of
the VCs or the
not
execs?
VCs have no pedigree. No, of the executives at the startups. How much does that play into you developing a warm fuzzy feel about the company? Because there's basically no provenance about the company at that point in time.
Right.
So you have to. Do you look at the technology? Do you dissociate that from the executives who run it? For example, Prenix Data. I never heard of the guy, but he comes in here and he's like, I was known as the guy who did the file system for VMware. All of a sudden, street cred goes through the roof. You're like, okay.
There's 2 different levels there. There's executives who are on their 2nd, 3rd, or nth startup. So if I look at NextGen, and I go, those are the left-hand guys.
Right.
They did a good job with left-hand. They understand the problems. There's a lot, so they get cred there. And then there's the guys who are important to some other company, but not senior management, who are now leaving and starting their own company. They might get some technical cred, but they don't get any, can I run the business, can I deliver a product cred? And and you're right, VCs, no cred at all. Because I've seen, every time somebody does a presentation, they go, this is where we got our money from. You should feel real warm and fuzzy because we got our money from important people who know what they're doing. I have sat in that presentation at an event and had guys tell me, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we have gold-plated VCs. And literally 3 days later, had those gold-plated VCs take all their money back and shut the doors.
There was a big high-profile case of that just a couple of years ago in the storage industry, and I think a lot of people really got burned by that because, like you say, that VCs cut both ways. They can help a company tremendously, and not just through money, but at the same time, if they decide that the time is up, and nobody's going to do anything about that.
Oh yeah.
Whereas a company with maybe lesser named VCs or more VCs or even less money may be willing to continue as a business when the VCs might have decided to shut it down because they just wanted to sell it out.
Well, again, you look at NextGen. Those guys took $12 million and built that company, delivered a perfectly good product, were very well established for $12 million. Some of the other vendors of that same generation took several times that much money
60, 80 million
to get to the same point. So there's a certain, I give those guys huge credit for having learned that lesson from Left Hand also.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
I was impressed with that yesterday because they talked about, managing or trying to deliver a product with limited resources, not throwing, money at this, their IT infrastructure, their test infrastructure, stuff like that. We totally contrast with, and goes right to what you said about VCs. And so we have these gold-plated VCs. I remember Webvan, $3 billion. I remember.
Yeah.
VCs love that.
The one thing, so I'm hearing a lot of risk of startup versus established. I think that's relatively self-evident with any investment. The one thing I'm not hearing that I think is a little more on the reality side is if you're going to invest in a startup, there's a lot of political ramifications that go along with that for the company itself that is going to invest. Maybe you're a director or mid-manager level trying to push for this, and there's some political fallout that may occur higher up. Maybe you're a consulting or VAR company that wants to pick up a startup, and that would probably have huge political ramifications. So I understand that we're all technologists and we want to, go for the cool tech and weigh those risks, but just to inject a little bit of kind of reality into the discussion as well. I think there's a lot of times where you may be barred from adopting a technology that meets those requirements. The risk outweighs, it's a little risky to go with this investment, but I'm going to get a huge performance gain, but it would completely shatter some kind of a relationship that I have based on some kind of fallout that may occur.
Yeah, well, the CIO plays golf with the EMC salesman every other
I'm
Sunday.
not naming vendors. I'm just saying.
So
Yeah, well, I have been, I have run RFPs where the dominant vendor in the industry proposed a solution cost literally 10 times as much. And we said, go with these guys. It wasn't even a startup, but go with these guys. It costs 1/10 as much. If it turns out not to be a good idea, you will have spent 110%. If it turns out to be a good idea, you will have spent 10%.
So what criteria should people use when looking at startups then?
Well, it doesn't
How
it
should they
depend?
decide whether this is worth doing or not?
But doesn't it depend on the company that's purchasing it? I mean, is it an SMB? Is it also a startup? I mean, would it be advantageous for these two startups
Oh,
to
very,
come up
very,
together?
very much so. And it's not really that. It's how much risk is your company worth? Is this a company that can understand that can make a bet knowing it's a bet, or can you go to your boss and go, boss, I think we should make this bet, and then have it not turn out, and have your boss turn to you and go, man, you told me to do that, you're fired. And you go, I told you it was a bet. It looked like a good bet. This was a 10-to-1 shot, and we would have been, and you're either hero or you're goat. But how does your company deal with goats? Companies that say, that bet didn't turn out, learn from it, and will move on, can actually do their IT in a much more cost-effective manner than companies that say, you made that bet, you lost, go find another job. And unfortunately, there are a lot of those.
I think a good way to take temperature just at a broad level for a startup is if I adopt their technology, am I going to get at least like a 50% boost in X? Is it performance? Is it cost? Is it whatever it is? I really wouldn't talk to someone unless they can offer me a dramatic increase over what I have.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let me tell you guys to wrap up a little tale. When I was a IT manager for a small R&D company in 1995, we needed something better than a Sun server and an Auspex system for file sharing, and we decided to go with a startup. And we bought one that offered really compelling features. And we decided this product was so good that we were willing to be an early adopter, and we bought first generation NetApp and deployed it. We were one of the first, not one of the first companies, but probably easily one of the first 100 companies that bought NetApp. But it was actually extremely obvious to me at the time that this company and this product was going somewhere, and it was so good and so compelling in terms of users being able to restore their own files and so on. I mean, like you say, there was a dramatic benefit to going with that. And I think sometimes with startups, you can kind of tell. I mean, Howard and me and others, we see a lot of startups, and we can tell whether it's a real company or whether it's just somebody's R&D in the garage.
Well, and how much does
And-
oversaturation?
And yeah, and there's a whole bunch of, there's a whole bunch of options, but frankly, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly, and you get a seat of the pants feeling that this is a company that I can go with, or this is not.
Yeah, part of it is, this is what we do for a living, is we look at companies making pitches to us. And, so the current generation of storage arrays, there's 8 or 10 companies there. 2 or 3 of them were pretty clear. These guys are going to be successful. Now, I define successful differently than a lot of people in this industry, because I think having a company that does $50 million a year and turns a $5 million a year profit and does that every year is a successful company. You don't need an exit strategy. That's a company you have to be a company. And you can look and you can go, these guys, this product, this set of guys, it satisfies this requirement. They understand how, a lot of it is they understand how to tell their story. We see a lot of, here's 4 products. They are all technically comparable, but this team knows how to tell the story and knows who the target customer is. And these guys throw a really good party, and we're going to be pals with them, but they may or may not ever be successful. But that's not something I expect customers to be able to do. Yeah, you have to, frankly, you have to have seen a lot of companies blow up. Because, Stephen, how many different ways do companies blow up? 7?
There must be 50 ways to lose your startup.
But also,
Stephen's next blog.
Yeah, hey, I like that. I like that.
We are speaking about buying a startup instead of buying a traditional vendor, but many times the startup can be used for a small project into the company. So the risk is very, very small.
Right.
So
Yeah. And that's
if you need to swap out a big iron, okay. There are risks, and you will be fired if something goes wrong.
It's the difference between betting $10 at 10 to 1 and $1 million at 10 to 1.
And that's actually a real important point that I want to make too about startups, especially storage startups. You'll hear a lot of storage startups talking about their big whale of a customer, and a lot of the time it's a big Wall Street customer. I assure you that Moneybags Bank is not using little startup storage in a critical piece of their infrastructure, even though they may be a customer and they may have their logo on the slides. Be very wary, especially when somebody says that a big bank is using them.
Right.
Because the big bank has a financial stake in the company. They're hoping that they'll go IPO and they'll be able to underwrite it, and they're using it in a lab somewhere in Weehawken. It's not.
Actually, it is always Weehawken.
Yeah.
It's awfully specific.
Could be Stanford, could be, but it's not.
Right. I mean, because and this is especially true if you talk to the all flash array vendors right now. They have all sold into some huge bank.
It's always the same.
No,
it's always the same bank, isn't it?
No, it's
hedging their bets.
although I will tell you one thing from long observation: every storage startup, when they put up the slide of our customers, has a school district. Why? Because there are 127,000 school districts, most of which have one IT guy, and all they had to do was convince one guy to buy this thing. It's like, oh, sure, look, we can put a school district up there. It's cool. But with the all flash arrays in the major financial institutions, they're almost all being used for analytics. They're almost all being used for these applications where performance is really important. But if the data goes away, we can just copy it again, because that's not the only copy of the data.
Yeah, I'm much more impressed when it comes with the logo of a regional bank somewhere than a big Wall Street one, because even if it's one that I've never heard of, because that means they're probably actually using it. and
that is their primary storage.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep that in mind.
Well, and even if they're investing in it, it probably makes a lot more difference than the big
unlikely to be invested.
Unless it's the regional bank in their hometown in the Midwest.
Yeah.
You know, if they're from Dubuque and, you know, Dubuque Bank and Trust is on there, you kind of got to go, huh, founder and Dubuque Bank and Trust president have the same last name.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for the startup discussion. Let's wrap that one up.